Hello, welcome everybody. You are logged into the today's webinar on the benefits of professional licensure for engineers. We are going to get started in about 2 minutes, so just hang tight until about 12:02 Eastern Time, and then we'll kick off the webinar. For those of you just logging in, if you missed my original message, you are in the correct place for the 12 o'clock webinar on the benefits of professional licensure for engineers. We're going to get started in about 1 minute, just to allow a couple extra minutes for everyone to get logged in. Okay, it is 12:02. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. This is the webinar on the benefits of professional licensure for engineers, put on by PPI. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Just a note about any questions that you might have. There is a chat box. You're welcome to put the questions in the chat box. We do have a limited amount of time today. It is a 50-minute webinar, and we do have quite a few questions to get through. So what we're going to be doing is logging down any questions that you might have, and we'll make sure that they're answered after the webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a very brief introduction about PPI. So we were founded in about 50 years ago in 1975 by Michael R. Lindeberg, PE. And we prepare students for a total of 38 professional licensing exams across engineering, architecture, and interior design. We are a publisher, so we do have print books, but especially as the exams have transitioned into a computer-based testing and year-round testing, closed book testing, a lot of our materials have transitioned over to digital. So we have a lot of online quiz banks, and we've built our practice exams to really closely simulate that NCEES exam experience. If you have taken your FE or PE, you might be familiar with our, our popular books like the FE Review Manual or the Civil Engineering Reference Manual. We are the publisher and author of those books, and then also of the courses and quizzes and online practice that we have as well. And then back in 2018, so about 5 years ago, we were acquired by Kaplan. So we're happy to be part of the broader Kaplan test prep team. You might have taken Kaplan for, maybe GRE or SAT prep, but we're very excited to be part of that Kaplan family as well. All right, before we kick off the panel discussion, I just wanted to go ahead and provide some introductions, or actually have our panelists introduce themselves. I'll go ahead and start with David. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm David Micnhimer, and I am a PE as well as an SE. My degrees are civil engineering for my bachelor's. My master's are in structural engineering and also robotics. And I'm also a PPI instructor and an author. So I teach the SE and PE courses, mainly structural courses. Right now, what I do for work is software, and I make structural engineering software. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. We'll go ahead and Erika, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Erika Weber. I have my PE, my SE. I'm currently working as an instructor at UNC Charlotte, and I've got my bachelor's and master's in civil engineering, and then my PhD civil engineering with an emphasis in structures as well.
Awesome.
I've
Thank
been a
you.
PPI instructor for about a year.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Erika has taught our SE course. All right. Next up, Khalid.
Hi everyone, I'm Khalid Hachil. I'm an electrical engineer working at Stantec. My master's and my bachelor's degree were both in electrical and computer engineering. I have my PE in New York State in electrical power, and I have my lead AP BDC as well. I've been working for PPI as an instructor teaching the FE course in electrical engineering for about a year now. And the kind of work that I do that is relatable to any students taking the course would be any sort of building design or MEP design.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Ray here, Ray Burynski.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Ray Burynski. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in mechanical engineering and applied mechanics, respectively, from Lehigh University. And I've been working with PPI since before they were acquired by Kaplan. I've been teaching both FE mechanical review and then PE machine design review since 2016. As for my career, I've been working, I worked for some time in industry. I was working as an independent consultant since about 2003. And then over the last 8 to 10 years or so, I've been really segueing into doing a lot more teaching and instructional work, working with students who in some instances are taking their very first engineering classes ever, to helping those become licensed engineers, and then also doing some continuing education courses for when you become a licensed engineer as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ray. And just a brief introduction of myself. I am the moderator of today's panel. My name is Jenny Sly. I have worked for PPI for 11 years. I'm a senior product manager, specifically responsible for managing our engineering review course programs, but also our university and our corporate programs as well. We're really excited to have this panel here for you guys today. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the first question. Why did you get licensed? So for this question, I really want to know like your own personal reasons for why you got licensed. You know, like what sort of personal reasons did you have? Was it career related? Was it a personal growth type of reason? So I will go ahead and get started. David, let's go ahead and start with you again.
Sure, thanks, Jenny.
Mhm.
Yeah, so my background is civil engineering, but mainly structural engineering. And really, from the structural engineering world, it's almost a requirement to get licensed to progress in your career. So for me, it wasn't anything different. I had jobs all across the United States that required somebody to stamp and become the engineer on record or the engineer of charge for those projects. So really for me, it was a necessity to get licensed. Of course, there are personal reasons as well. I like the prestige from it. Um, but mainly it was because my companies that I worked for required it. Um, and then also getting the SE license later on. Of course, there are some states that just require the SE license. So for me, for both reasons, for both licenses, it was a necessity to be able to stamp these projects.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Erika, you want to go into your reasons for getting licensed?
Sure. So thanks, Jenny. I started off actually working in industry, and so I got my PE like David, because that's what everybody does. Like that's kind of expected of a lot of civil engineers, specifically in the structural side of things. And you can't grow unless you have your PE. But interesting story is I actually failed. I took it in California because California's for PEs, it's one of the top ones that you have one of the top tests because you've got more tests associated with it.
Mhm.
And I actually passed it. I passed the national exam, I passed the seismic exam, and I failed the surveying exam. And I had to go back and take the exam, like take the surveying exam again. So I got licensed in Nevada because I was working in Nevada at the time. But then I went back and made sure I got licensed in California as well because I wanted that for myself. And then later on, when I went for the SE, I had left industry by then. I'd been working in academia for a while and hadn't seen a lot of industry related stuff. So I wanted to get the SE for myself. And I failed it the first time. And then COVID hit. And when you failed it that first time, because I wanted it, it's the highest credentials my students could get or see. And that's a high, and I wanted to be able to represent, like, this is what you can get. I know what I'm talking about. And so that's probably the reason why I got my SE. But then after I failed it, I was like, I'm going back and I'm doing this for me. Not because everybody knows I'm taking it. I'm doing this because I want this for myself and I want to prove it to myself.
That's
And
awesome.
I
And
finally passed.
I know that SE exam is a beast. The pass rates are very, very low. So it's awesome to hear when people do pass that exam. Okay, next up, Khalid.
Yeah, so the main decision between getting my PE was primarily for professional development. I understood very early on in my career that unless I get my PE, I won't excel in my field and I'll be left out of plenty of opportunities. And on top of that, I had a conversation with a few higher up engineers, some of them through different colleges, some of them through work. And the one thing that I heard very consistently was, even though you have your degree, you're not an engineer. And that kind of threw me off. And he said, you're technically a designer. So you're an electrical designer or a plumbing designer. Once you get your PE, then you can call yourself an engineer. So that was pretty much the driving force as to why I was becoming a PE.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. All right. And then again, last but certainly not least, Ray.
Sure. So, yeah, as I noted earlier, I did a bachelor's and a master's degree and at the same institution. So I was sort of in this academic world for a while. And a lot of the professors, if some of them might have had PE licenses, it wasn't really talked about much. Once I got my first job out in industry, I noticed a few things. One was that a lot of the people who were telling me what to do and a lot of the ones who were telling them what to do within our organization were licensed engineers. I also noticed as well that there were many other of our, would say, more influential engineers, even if they weren't in the management structure, also had the PE designation. And so while I was aware of what it was, I became a little bit more curious about it and what the whole process and journey would be to go towards becoming licensed, and just started talking to some of the other PEs who would mentor me somewhat informally as to what the process was all about. So that's when I went through, I took at that time it was called the EIT exam, before it was called the FE, not to date myself, and then would eventually go on to take the PE exam in 2003. And so, yes, so for me, one of the reasons, of course, was for that professional development. It was one more credential that I would be able to earn as well. And as we're going to find out later on, there were a lot of other benefits that I wasn't even realizing at that time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's very interesting just to hear the various reasons why people get licensed. And I know that all four of you come from different backgrounds and have different motivations for doing that. And this license really does help out, a lot of people for different reasons.
Right. And I guess I would add to that within my organization, I think different from the other three, it wasn't always a strict requirement, but when you see a lot of people with it, it sort of becomes maybe an informal or unsaid requirement that it's something that's going to help you out a lot, even if it's not strictly noted.
Exactly.
Like
Yeah, a lot of people might think that they don't need it for their job, and maybe that's true for where they currently are, but you want to be able to get that license and for future opportunities. Okay, I will go ahead and go to the next question here. So we talked a little bit about, your own personal reasons for getting licensed. This question is more about more general benefits of becoming a licensed professional engineer. So maybe these aren't necessarily exactly why you personally did it, but just talking through some of those more general benefits of why someone would want to be licensed. Do we want to go ahead and, Erika, do you want to start this one off for us?
Sure. So one of the things we'd like to recommend my students is get your license, to get your FE, because even if you take a different path, getting that license actually opens doors to you for like different, wherever your life takes you. So getting your PE license opens those doors for something new when things kind of come up. And you also hear that a lot of companies in civil engineering, for example, they are looking for licensed engineers or somebody that can become licensed relatively recently. And so those are like two of the really big ones that I've kind of seen right now.
Awesome. Anyone else want to jump in about any benefits of becoming a licensed professional engineer?
I guess I would like to add on to what Erika said about being able to become licensed. I think is something that improves your marketability as you want to move around as well. So even if you're only halfway there, you've taken the FE, even if it's not required within your organization, then it's something that future employers might be looking for as well, because you're already at least part of the way there to becoming licensed, and they'll have in the back of their minds of what they could require in the future.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Companies do like to see how many licensed engineers they have, or even in academia, they like to see how many faculty are licensed or whatnot. That's a part of the accreditation things that we kind of mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a guide for them to see how do they determine you as a person. A lot of times, especially during interviews, when they ask you, what do you like to do in your personal life, on your free time, or where do you see yourself in 5 years, your FEPE does give them an idea of the direction you want to go in, or the fact that you're willing to spend your night studying, or the fact that you're willing to work harder than the other person. So when they're hiring or when they're considering a promotion, do they want to go for the person that's willing to work harder, or the person that said, I don't need it? So that's also usually like an unspoken rule, or like a gentleman's rule that they consider.
Yeah, I've often wondered, when recruiters are looking to fill positions, you could have very similar qualifications as the person next to you, but if you have that license, that's going to give you a leg up in that getting that job.
Yeah, the PE designate. Yeah, that PE designation, it does give you sort of a subtle way of doing a little bit of bragging or sort of pumping yourself up as well when you're doing that. If you noticed, all of our names listed here, we have the PE and SE and PE after our names as well. It lets somebody know, again, as Khalid said, that you are a serious professional without having to say that you're a serious professional. Kind of like, speaking articulately and dressing sharp. Having that PE designation after your name lets them know right away the type of professional they're dealing with.
Yes, usually when you're in a meeting or when you're in a conversation and you just kind of throw out there, I'm a PE, it usually gets a reaction from people, which is very nice.
Yeah.
And Khalid, you're being in electrical engineering too. I know not, all electrical engineers feel like they need to get their PE, but you said that, it kind of surprises them, or it definitely calls attention that you have your PE. I didn't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to that as far as like your experience with being an electrical engineer and getting your professional license.
Sure. So the time I took it, I was also taking around my coworkers, a lot of them. It's a difficult exam. And a lot of times what tends to happen is people go online, they check the stats, and they go, oh, a lot of people just fail electrical, so I'm just not going to do it. But then that's kind of improving the market or the search for finding a PE. So because it's so rare in electrical specifically, it's very difficult to pass. Oftentimes, people just don't want to do it, or after a first fail, they don't go for it. It's just recommended. Also, the thing that we didn't talk about, which is probably the biggest question on people's mind, is pay and salary. Whether you get your FE or PE, whether it's immediate, my employers, both of them were nice enough to do something immediate, or they could do mid-year or end-of-year raises that could reflect you getting your FE and PE. So although your industry might have a different demand, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to project your career further than others.
Yes.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Khalid. I also got an immediate bump in salary as well, just for getting the extra letters after my name. And on top of that too, my employers also paid for just the courses and review books and all the stuff that I needed to pass the exams too. So I mean, that's sort of a unspoken benefit, I would say, as well.
Right. I think a lot of people, especially going for their FE, don't realize that they can ask their employer, like, hey, do you have tuition reimbursement? Will you pay for my exam? And usually most employers do have a program like that. Because they're willing to invest in their staff, they do realize the benefits of having an FE and a PE.
Also, along those lines too, the difference between like the FE and the PE. You get, first of all, you get a little bit of confidence boost, like look at me with my PE license or whatever it is. But the other thing is going from your like EI to going from a designer to becoming an engineer, you get to stamp drawings. And as a designer, you're designing based off of somebody else's preferences on how things should be done. Where when you're the licensed engineer or the engineer of record, it's based off of your personal preferences and stuff rather than somebody else's.
Right. So from a legal standpoint, you're able to take on more responsibilities. So even if you feel like you're a hard worker and you don't have your FEPE, your position in the company and your responsibility is capped on a legal level. Once you do have your PE, then you're able to accelerate to a point where other capped, positions won't allow you to.
And I know from a PPI standpoint, if you're ever interested in being a review course instructor or a subject matter expert, having that license is a requirement as well. So that is something, quite a few of our current instructors were actually past students of PPI. So yeah, we got David, actually all four of them. Yeah, so all four of these instructors, I actually don't think I remember that all four of you were, but yeah.
I've used the materials extensively, yes.
Yeah, so they've all used the PPI materials, got their professional license, and are now, paying it forward and teaching, FE and PE and SE courses for the next round of professional engineers. But yeah, if teaching is something, I know like a lot of times in the academic world, you don't necessarily need a professional license, but for teaching these types of courses, that is something that we do look for. And if that's something that is interesting to you, we're always looking for subject matter experts and instructors as well.
Yeah. And along those lines, when you're talking about teaching, I would like to add, so I also teach continuing education courses as well, which would of course require a license to be able to do that. So once, I know many of our listeners out here are in the early stages of this, once you become a licensed engineer, many states require that you take continuing education in order to maintain your license, and it varies from state to state. But I teach some of those courses for those who are already licensed within my areas of expertise as well. And teaching those courses, again, requires that one's a licensed engineer, because of course you're sharing your knowledge with other licensed engineers as well, so that designation is a requirement.
Awesome. Before we move to the next question, I just wanted to make sure that we captured everyone's thoughts there.
I would say for me that the salary bump that the other three of you have enjoyed wasn't something that I enjoyed. Unfortunately, at least not as an immediate benefit. I did get a new stack of business cards. That was nice with my PE designation on it. But you do find that there is increased salary within my realm, although it's a little bit more indirect. And that just comes from the fact that now there are other doors and other doors available to you, other opportunities and so forth that might be more lucrative. And so while it wasn't an immediate change within my organization, having those other opportunities available to you is another way to see a salary boost.
Right, and I know we talked about being marketable, like maybe from a, like if you're trying to get hired for a job for yourself, but you also want to be marketable for, you know, potential clients or people that you're going to be working on projects with. And they, you know, having that PE after your name again is going to make you stand out to clients as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have been plenty of times where people have reached out to me just because I have the PE after my name or just because I have the SE after my name. And it might be in a totally separate field. They might want electrical engineering done, and I'll go and say, hey, go talk to Khalid or something. But yeah, just having the letters after your name just opens so many doors.
All right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they want like very immediate salary raises or immediate benefits. For the most part, it does happen. Sometimes, like in Ray's case, it doesn't happen. But your career path and your career success, your career salary is like compound interest. You're taking smaller steps, but they're accruing more over time. So if you were to compare yourself to someone who doesn't have a PE, then you can see 10 years down the line how much of a gap it is between the two of you.
Yep, for those who are mechanically engineering minded, if you look in Machine Design Magazine, they do a salary survey. I know they put one out last year, and I think they felt that the average benefit was about $15,000 a year between licensed engineers versus not. And I think that's from January 2022, if you want to reference that on your own. Machine Design Magazine.
That's a substantial amount of money. Yeah.
Yep. Pays for a lot of review courses.
I can't say that I've ever read Machine Design Magazine, but it sounds like a great publication.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question unless anyone has anything else to say on this one. You're good? Okay. All right. Next up. So we've talked about, you know, a lot about the benefits of being licensed, what your own personal reasons might have been. I also wanted to touch upon why you think some engineers don't get licensed and maybe talk through some of those fears, those hesitations, and go from there. So Khalid, did you want to get us started on this one?
Sure. So in general, for people not getting their licenses, some of the answers are very consistent. Some people have like test anxieties, so it's very difficult for them to sit in an exam. Some people have a little bit of a confidence issue when it comes to taking the exam. But what I hear often is that life is getting in the way, whether their workload is very heavy or they have family now, they have kids now, they waited a little bit too long, and they just don't have the time to study. Regarding that aspect, I always say that for taking the course or for studying, finally taking the exam, the window is about 5 months. But your career, you're going from 22 when you graduate college to about 65. So although those 5 months may seem very heavy, it's just best to rip it off like a band-aid whenever you can, because workload never gets better. If you finally got a big project out, your employer's like, oh, you got some availability. Here, work nights on this big project. And you're like, again, okay. And besides that, I often hear most of my students are from the ages of maybe mid-30s to all the way up to 50. So they always say that they waited too long. It's been too long from college. They don't remember even general mathematics, which they're having issue with, let alone the more difficult topics like electromagnetism. So that little fear stays in them on whether or not they can actually understand the material and pass. But from what I found is older students have the discipline that a kid out of college typically doesn't have. So that's a fear that's mainly, I would say, that they can get over, that it's not that bad. They could always get through studying if it's been too long from college. And one of the biggest, two last biggest reasons, one would be no available PE on there to sign off. So to get a PE license after you get your FE, you need your supervisor to sign off on your experience, which is different from your references. You need someone to say, I worked over him on this project. I was a supervisor on this project. I'm willing to put my moral stamp and my seal on this application saying I approve his experience. So legally, you're taking responsibility for this engineer. And a lot of people work in companies or they have jobs that they've landed that don't have a PE that is there to sign off or that's willing to sign off on their experience. So oftentimes that is a big hiccup as to why people can't or won't get their PE. The last that I see a lot that is unfortunately a little bit sad is bad advice just saying that you don't need it. We kind of discussed the benefits, a lot of it, but people generally keep saying, well, I've been told that you don't need it. I've worked in the public sector, I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in railroad, manufacturing. I'm primarily an MEP guy. That's where most of my experience is, in building design. But in any field, you're going to find a PE who's signing off on drawings. One of my best friends was and still is in manufacturing, and even he said, I don't need it. But there's a very young guy sitting at the top of this multinational company, and he's a PE, and he's very young for that position, but he's not connecting the dots as to why there's certain documents and certain confidentiality and documents that he's not allowed to see, and that person is. So that advice of you don't need it is the one that I hear the most. So that's unfortunately something that's it's a myth or sort of like a misconception of people's career moving forward.
Those were all really great points. Thank you, Khalid. Sorry, Erika, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I know for civil engineering, the ones that I also hear a lot of, like you were saying, is that confidence. When you've got these high fail rates for these exams, or just the anxiety about being able to take it or whatever, or pass it, or being good enough. Am I good enough to be an engineer? Am I smart enough to stamp those drawings and take that responsibility? Do I have enough confidence in my own ability? It took me 2 years to finally pass the SE. Granted, COVID hit in the middle of it, but there's a lot of personal growth that kind of goes through that process. You might not necessarily have that confidence at the beginning, but you'll get it in the end. When you get that stamp, you have that confidence, like, oh, I earned this. I know it. I know my stuff because I worked so hard to get it. And I think, like a lot of things in life, and the licensure is a big part of it, those things most worth having are sometimes the hardest worth getting.
And also, I do like one thing that you said, whether or not you want to take the responsibility of stamping those drawings. That is something that people do worry about, but they really shouldn't, because it's very similar to when a surgeon works at a hospital. When you work for a hospital, the hospital takes liability and they pay for your malpractice. Even though we're PEs and we're stamping off on drawings and it's our responsibility, it's the firm that's taking any sort of insurance or any sort of legal action if that's required. If there's any audit, your firm will be taking care of it, or your company will be taking care of it. It won't be you directly.
Also, I think another thing that kind of like scares people, you were saying life balance, depending on what stage you have, the continuing education afterwards. Where, like, do I have time to cram in those 15 hours a year when you end up doing it like in December or whatnot? Like, that fear, that overwhelming fear of being able to maintain that license as well. But I think a lot of companies are like provide those opportunities for you, and there's a lot of free things out there for you to get this continuing education. It's just, you can find the time to do it.
You can. I think people probably find that life balance is going to take a little bit of adjustment from what they might be used to. You know, as a student, I lived on, Mountain Dew and Snickers bars for a lot of my late night study sessions. And then once you have, I took my PE with twins who were 2 years old, approximately, a year and a half to 2 years old, at home at the time, with my wife also working a busy job. And you find you need to adjust your schedule. Now maybe my new sweet spot for studying is now 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. before I go to work, or whatever it is it might be. Or maybe you need to give up some of those times on the weekends. But as Khalid said, okay, you're gonna have to give up a few rounds of golf now for something that you're gonna now have forever. And so that's, you just have to look at it as another investment in yourself you'll have to make.
So has coffee and granola replaced your Mountain Dew and Snickers?
Well, the coffee was always there, I think, since graduate school. No, the Snickers are still there too.
Okay, still going.
I'll try. I have learned that I probably am not as effective at 2 a.m. as I am in the morning anymore. So
Yeah.
yeah, and my kids are old enough now that they don't need me standing over them.
I
But
I
also,
had
I
an
did.
instructor a couple of weeks ago say something about like uh, a lot of times like it's just people decide not to go for their license because of just where the industry is right now. Like let's just say right now a lot of mechanical engineering companies are hiring mechanical engineers, for example, and a lot of people are wanting to focus on their career and getting those jobs. Or maybe this year it might be electrical engineers. There's a big need for that, and so the license kind of gets put on the back burner while you're trying to get these, new jobs in industry. And I didn't know if anyone has kind of heard the similar thing, or if that's something that you've come into contact with.
Yeah, so that was actually somehow leading into what I was about to say about a
Oh,
coworker. Funny enough, my coworker is probably in his mid 60s, so he's going to be retiring soon. And he's like this genius. Like he's the go-to guy. He's getting calls from anywhere in the country. It's very interesting. And he was telling me how when he started in the industry, probably in the 70s, that PEs were very rare. It wasn't even easy to get someone to sign off on your experience. And he really didn't care. He had a job. He was happy. And it wasn't something that was required. At that time in construction, you were just able to get a job, especially in New York City with the development that was happening at the time. Now, when he was about 20 years into his industry, into his profession, he got an intern and he started training this kid who's just out of college or just still in college. And now, fast forward 2023, and he's telling me this story. He's like, that guy got his PE, he got his master's or MBA or something, and he's one of the biggest bosses at our company, which is one of the largest architecture and engineering firm in the world. And that guy is probably 5 or 6 spots above on my ladder and only 4 on his. And he said, just missed the bus. I was training this kid. I had 20 years on him. He was my intern, and now he's my boss's boss. So
that's
he
so
wasn't
funny.
happy
That's
that day when he
interesting.
was telling me the story.
Awesome. Okay, I was going to go to the next. I actually think we have one more question up. Does anyone have anything else to add on this before I move on? We covered it? Okay. All right. Last question here is about any tips or advice about actually getting licensed. So I know we talked a lot about the benefits and maybe why people don't get licensed, but this one's more, I know it can be kind of it could be a convoluted or cumbersome process, or maybe there's some confusions around it. And so I just wanted to touch upon any tips or advice you'd have about the actual process of getting licensed. And David, I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna tell you all the tips that they don't want you to know about. Um,
Good.
so, one thing that was told to me early on in my career is to start that NCEES record. So, when you register for the PE exam or the SE exam or the FE exam, you have to register through your state board and eventually through the NCES. So the best thing about this is if you start this record early, you'll have your references. You'll have what Khalid was talking about earlier with all of your supervisors, work experience. All of that is included, and it just makes it so easy to get the licenses in just about every state. Sure, there are nuances in some states. You might have to take an ethics test or something similar, but for me, after I passed my PE exam, I was able to get comity in just about any state I registered for. And it was so easy once I got that NCES record. So my number one tip and advice is to start that record early.
That's a great tip.
I actually have a funny story with that tip. So when I got my license, I was also trying to get reciprocity in another state. And so I used the NCES thing and sent off all my information to the state I wanted to get my reciprocity in, and then didn't hear anything from the state, didn't hear anything from my state. I'm like, why didn't I get my license in this additional state? I forgot to do the process for that actual state as well. So make sure when you're doing, so when I emailed the state, I was like, why hasn't what's the status of this? And they're like, you haven't started the form. So also make sure that you know your state's requirements that you're trying to get reciprocity for. So having the NCES thing is great. Also know you'll send that information right over to the state that you want, but also make sure that you know what that state's requirements are, because some states require more experience than others. Some states allow you to take the exam early on and get the experience later. So it really varies from state to state, and know which state, like know your specific state's requirements.
Yeah, and I know I do know a lot of states are different, and I know some states, for example, I mean, you can take your FE and your PE, back to back, or you don't necessarily have to have the 4 years of experience before taking the PE. You can take the PE and then get your 4 years of experience. And so I do know that a lot of people end up doing that so they can essentially get those 2 exams, out of the way as quickly as possible, especially if you're just graduated from college and a lot of this information might be fresh in your mind. So that's something to consider too, is really looking at those state requirements and seeing what you are and aren't able to do.
Yep. And I would recommend too identifying people who could be potential references for you for that PE exam as early in the process as you can, and just approach them and just ask them maybe advice, about their journey to becoming a licensed engineer. And this way they can, start to guide you a little bit along the way as well. And it also will try to help to keep you on track, because they'll probably cycle back with you from time to time and then ask you how things are going. Did you take the FE yet? How did it go? Have you got your amplified record together yet? Have you been doing these other steps to kind of nudge you along? Because it is a little bit of a long journey. The 8 hour, if it was just the 8 hour exam, you'd probably see a lot more people doing it. There's a lot of work to get just to be able to sit for that exam.
Yeah, and maybe one of those PEs would be able to help you out with your application. The most difficult part, of course, being documenting your experience. I one time saw this person's application. He wasn't a PE. He was a very experienced designer, and he had sent in an application for 10 years of experience, and he had 2 lines for every project he ever did. 2 lines to the state. Of course, he got rejected. My application, I think for just my experience, was like 17 pages, just documenting my experience. So that alone, you need a little bit of help. You need to describe the project, budget, size. You need to reference as much code as you can, as well as your involvement of the project. And that's the experience that your supervisor will be signing off on.
And also along those lines too, in CES, as you're filling out the forms, I had with mine, there was a gap year where I didn't have an engineer of record over me. And they actually, they helped with the process so that you can write in the NCES and explain what's happening during that time. And so even if right now you don't have an engineer of record, or if there's a time gap where you didn't have an engineer of record, they do, the process allows for that wiggle room to make it happen. Like the wiggle room for documentation, not necessarily the wiggle room for not having it, but the documentation to help explain it.
Right, and to get all that documentation as well, I think Khalid had mentioned it sometime earlier, is start early. Look at what your state requires to get that PE or the FE license, and start doing those things ahead of time. Like Ray had said, it's not just taking an 8-hour test. You have to have those references. You have to fill out the paperwork. You have to get all that done ahead of time. So make sure you know everything ahead of time and work towards that.
And I know it's probably the hardest tip because it's not really always in your control, but it's working under a PE. When I graduated college and I was going through all these offers, one of my most important questions was, do you have a PE that I'll be working under? And that was one of the biggest driving factors because it's like an investment. It's like when a doctor works his residency. His first 4 years, his salary is pretty sad. But then once he becomes a doctor, he's driving in a fancy new car, and you know exactly why. So, and that's actually advice I got from one of my college professors. He was a networking engineer. So when I was taking a class, he said he actually didn't start his career in network engineering. He was doing something else. It was decent money, but he felt like it was a dead-end job. So he said he took a $30,000 pay cut to start an entry-level job, learn something that he never had understood before, and after 5 years, he was making more than 3 times the amount of money that he was making before. So although it's a very difficult, it's a very scary move, oftentimes going for PE supervisor is just an investment. It may be short-term, not the best thing in mind, but it's an investment for your future.
That's great. That's awesome. I think that's really cool that was a question that you made sure to ask just in the interview process, and also just making sure that it's a good fit for you and that it's going to help you long term with your career as well.
That's a good point to note, because I've talked with others who were they graduate college, they're working in some smaller companies, maybe with just 2 people in it, and now they're thinking about how they want to become a licensed engineer, and they're finding it challenging just from that reference perspective, because it's him and a couple of others who they made this startup company, which was a great thing to do, but from a licensure perspective, it's going to be hard on that pathway, we'll say, because you're not able to find references who are familiar with your work, who can say, I've supervised this individual doing those things.
Right, and even the industry can sometimes be a little bit difficult. I worked in the public sector, and the public sector is very rare to find PEs because it's so hard for them to, they can't really sign off on their experience. But what I saw when I was working in the public sector was that they're more than willing to hire someone who is in the private sector, give them the salary that they want, give them the position that they want, and it just jumped over everyone else who's been spending years and committing to that company. That's also true for research facilities. So if there's a research facility or a science lab, they're always looking to update their labs or to build a new building or to provide the power or mechanical requirements for the new machinery, for the new test equipment. And they're always reaching out to PEs like, hey, come on, we'll pay you whatever you want. So even if that's the field that you want to do, sometimes you have to go somewhere else to be able to jump over. So it's kind of like a game. You're jumping from one ladder, going up vertically, and then jumping back to the ladder that you want.
All right. Well, we have about 2 more minutes left. So unless someone has something really burning to say, I was going to go to the last slide here. Does anyone have anything else? Okay.
I guess maybe.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say maybe one other tip. Tell people you're going to do it. Tell people in your organization you're going to get licensed, because that's going to hold you accountable to them to actually doing it.
I love that. Yep.